I think I'm going to stand. So thank you, Andrew, Ariel, Ashley, folks at KPCC for inviting me to this. Just as a side note, the TIO project is also a community partner of KPCC. So yeah, as a fellow colleague, I'm happy to be here and to talk about how we can be better partners as a journalist, and also how do you really think about community engagement. So to talk about TIO, I have to give you kind of the origin story of FYLPRO. So FYLPRO is the Filipino Young Leaders Program. It is a 501c3. It is a partnership with the Ayala Foundation in the Philippines, as well as a partnership with the Department of Foreign Affairs in the Philippines. And it really started as a way to bridge the gap between Filipinos and Filipino Americans, and just how do we connect their heritage and their connection to the motherland. So I was part of the cohort, the last cohort that went to the Philippines in 2019. And to say the least, it was probably the most transformative, life-changing program I've ever been part of. I had only been to the Philippines once before, and to go back, spend a week there with peers that I don't know if I would have ever, crossed paths with unless I was like interviewing them. There were, doctors, lawyers, technologists as part of my cohort, and they are definitely been lifelong friends to this day. So what does that have to do with COVID and the TIO project? Well, obviously when we came back from the Philippines in late 2019, as the new year started in 2020, we were all pumped. We were very inspired. Like, how do we, help our community after this life-changing trip? Obviously, when COVID happened, we were all, shelter in place, stuck at home, and we were feeling helpless. And I remember distinctly one of these meetings that we had with alumni. We were all trying to figure out, how do we help our lolos and lolas, our titas and titas, like basically our grandparents, our older aunties and uncles, because they were sharing misinformation. And for us, being part of this community, there is a level of respect. So we were basically trying to answer this question, like, how do you have these difficult conversations with your community without being disrespectful? And there was I distinctly remember this one anecdote that our alumni shared. His father was about to go to the Philippines, and he was trying to convince him, this is actually not a good idea. Like, you should be staying at home. You don't know with COVID. And he said this one word that really sparked the entire idea. He's like, well, I wish we had a playbook of how do we talk to our parents and our aunties about COVID-19. And once he said that, it just clicked in my head. And as you know, if you ever worked with community or been part of boards, and I happened to be part of that board, and I asked, hey, what are we doing about COVID-19? And when you ask the question, you become the person doing the project. And that's exactly what happened. They're like, whoa, well, why don't you lead the COVID-19 task force? I'm like, okay, fine, you're gonna put me in charge of something, let's go. So pretty much we convened our first meeting end of April. And to this day, it's been 2 years, almost 2 years later, we've been meeting consistently on Zoom every Sunday, minus a couple of holidays, core group of people, every Sunday. We've been meeting for 2 years. And the result of this is the TIO help desk. And essentially I said, well, if we're gonna do this, let's go for funding. And prior to this small nonprofit had never applied for a grant. And I'm like, well, I never wrote a grant either, but let's try it. And so we entered a proposal to several places, and we got a hit. We got into the quarterfinals of the Booz Allen Innovation COVID funding challenge, and then we kept surviving each cut, every cut till the end. And what we had originally pitched was a call center, because we thought, all right, well, our target, most vulnerable sectors of the Filipino community, we felt were our seniors, because not all of them were tech savvy, our frontliners, because a lot of our own parents and relatives and people we knew were part of the medical field, and not only medical field, but the front lines, right? And then lastly, the unemployed. So we focused on those three, and that's what we had pitched to Booz Allen. And in the end, they did award us that first seed funding for $25,000. It wasn't the initial amount we were going for, but it was enough to at least do the case study. So the result was this virtual help desk Q&A format, which we launched in October of 2020. So we're approaching almost our 2-year anniversary. And literally, this was really truly a community. Talk about community engagement. This is a great example of what a community engagement project looks like. And for an organization like FYLPRO, I am the only journalist in this multidisciplinary group. But it's a good exercise and good kind of validation that you can work with different disciplines under like a common cause. So as the only journalist, I obviously bring that perspective, but working with doctors, lawyers, technologists has just been truly a gift, because and in many ways it's kind of like similar to what we're going through in our newsrooms, right? Working in multidisciplinary departments and whatnot. But yeah, so we launched in 2020, and to date we published more than 500 Q&As, both in English and in Filipino/Tagalog, and this is all through just the community and how do we figure out how do we deliver this information, because again, we saw our aunties and uncles sharing this misinformation, and so we figured, if how do we make them share what we're creating so that we're the trusted source? We look like you. We could be your niece, your daughter, your cousin. So like, make sure if you're going to share it with your circle of friends, share the our information that's vetted, that's put through our subject matter expert panelists, things like that. So to this day, we've gone beyond the actual virtual help desk. We are currently wrapping up a call center pilot, the original concept, because we got another round of funding from Booz Allen. And then we're doing a bunch of other data type of exercises and like projects. So we're also in the middle of this COVID-19 survey, because we also identified a challenge within this community, like the lack of disaggregated data around Filipino Americans. There are 4 million in the US, third largest APA group, but yet there's very little research on Filipinos. So we figured, why wait for someone to do the research? Let's go ahead and collect it. We have experts on our team, so we've done that. And then also partnered up with a lot of universities and researchers that are doing this content and making sure we're getting the word out. The other takeaway I want to leave with you all is also what is very important. In doing all of this, obviously it's not enough that we're giving factual, vetted information on COVID-19, but what is, I think, different for us in terms of being just typical fact-checking, like, kind of project, is our work in battling misinformation. And what is key to us, it has to go beyond just giving the facts, but how do we culturally tailor this information? So what do I mean by that? So it's not just like, give a link to the CDC, like, this is what you need to do during COVID-19. That's not enough for this community to make it really resonate. So what we did is to make sure it's culturally tailored, and this is where it's key when you're working with the community, is because I would have never thought of this, even though I am part of this community, I would have never thought of this in terms of like, how do we convey this information? How do we explain COVID? So this is a great example. We've done several webinars. So, bringing in things culturally tailored, talking about why vaccines are important, why should you get it? So, if people are familiar with your fast food icons, you have Ronald McDonald, but Jollibee is a big, iconic fast food chain in the Philippines. And so we did this webinar in partnership with a lot of Philippine doctor orgs and nurses associations, as well as the consulate, and really targeted to our seniors. So trying to explain it in this way, I would have never even thought of using that, but that really came out of the community engagement. Even things like, how do you explain how can like this question, like debunking this, right? Well, can I get COVID from RNA vaccines? Will vaccine change my DNA? So of course, Filipinos, if you ever have a Filipino friend, oftentimes the first question they ask you, have you eaten yet? And that's really out of love. So we brought in kind of the food analogy, right? So instead of going, we still have the technical aspect to it, but it's like, instead, here's how we can explain it. Longanisa, like the fried rice, egg, and this is how it all comes together. And this has always been, like, every time we've done this presentation, it's always been like a hit because automatically they get it. So yeah, so I just want to, just emphasize, like, I don't think this would have ever came out of just, talking about this in the newsroom. Even if you do have a couple folks in your community, it really came out of just the partnership and just being in it, and really figuring out what is going to work and testing this. So we basically tested this with a couple of audiences before we went bigger on it. But yeah, so far it's just been a great journey. And just to wrap up, we still continue to do this work because COVID is still here. A lot of our folks are still very much impacted by it. And we're always learning, and I found that I've learned so much. And coincidentally, tayo in Tagalog means us. So it's really truly powered for us by us in the community. And in essence, we're always going to cover COVID, but we're in the middle of a pivot, trying to make this more a data innovation hub. So really founded on three tenets: data, like how do we be better collectors of data? How do we encourage folks to participate in like focus groups, research studies? Because when you try to pitch these stories, oftentimes the first thing the editors will ask is, where's the data? And sometimes that data is not disaggregated, and that's very problematic in telling that full story. Secondly is like, again, how do we culturally tailor this type of information? Because it's not enough to just send somebody a link to the CDC Foundation, like CDC fact sheet or whatever. Like, my grandmother will be like, what is this, So thinking about that and really taking that extra step. And then lastly, it's, I think, how do we bring in the community? So, obviously as a young leaders, professional, interdisciplinary nonprofit, this project would not exist without our fellows. So we just graduated our last third round of cohorts, a cohort of college students that work with us during the summer, and they are often the ones that are fulfilling some of the grants that we've gotten from like HHS, CDC Foundation, they just finished a project on, partnering up with HHS on like how do you encourage people to get the booster campaign. So they did like a series of TikTok videos, which I would have never known how to like even position that. So again, it's like, data, culturally tailoring it, the content, and then just like leadership. How do we just continue to just build that pipeline and whatnot? So yeah. So I think that's it.